Hey, budding lawyers, welcome to the podcast. Today, we are going to talk about mental health laws and advocacy with Miss Asavri Soni. Hi, Asavri.
Hi, how are you?
Great. And this is an interesting topic. I mean, it would be new to many people listening here, and it was even new to me. I didn't know. I just have heard about it. That true only you, because of
Yeah.
you, because I follow you on LinkedIn and all. Okay. Yeah. So Asavri is a lawyer, a mental health advocate. She's also a certified yoga instructor, and she has been in the practice of yoga teaching since 2 years. So Asavri, let's start with this question, which must have been asked to you a lot. Why yoga after LLB? Was this in your plan, or did you decide it later due to some reason?
Yeah, no, yoga post law was never a plan. It was never part of any plan. In fact, when I graduated from law school in 2018, I was feeling quite disconnected with the law for about 7 to 8 months. And I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. What was helpful was that when I was in law school, courtesy my mother,
Hmm.
I was in the regular practice of yoga. So I was attending her classes because she's an instructor.
Okay.
And because of that, I'd been in the practice and I just felt like I didn't know which part of law should I focus my attention on. There was, I was a little underconfident. I was not very sure of myself. So in the time that I was taking a break, it was actually my mom who encouraged me that, there's a teacher's training course that is happening. Why don't you give it a shot? See if it, works for you. And it actually turned out to be a wonderful experience undergoing this program. And it was about 4.5 months of teacher training experience that we received. And I certainly think that whatever I have learned in depth in yoga, whether the study or the history of yoga, it's a skill set that will stay with me for life. It is of use on an everyday basis to me. And yoga actually came to my life at a time when I was struggling with my mental health as well. So it kind of acted like a cushion. It helped me out when I was struggling. So I think it just went along beautifully with, my life course at that point of time. So it happened post law school though. It was never part of the plan.
Okay. And listening to you, it feels like it was a life-changing experience for you, right?
It was. It was. It really was.
Okay. So now, what work are you doing currently? Like, can you take us through your usual day of work?
Yes, certainly. So my day, I try to keep my working days to a 5 day week. So that's usually Monday to Friday. And my day begins pretty early because I have yoga classes that I conduct that start early in the morning. So a class can sometimes begin as early as 6 a.m. And the mornings are usually dedicated to conducting these classes. The class formats are usually either group classes or private classes, which could also be spaced out through the rest of the day. But in addition to that, in the last year and a half, I actually found mental health law, and I've gone ahead and gotten myself admitted into various courses and programs that has helped me connect with mental health care from the holistic sense also and from the legal standpoint as well. So in the time that I mean, this is actually up to about 3 weeks ago, the time that I'm not conducting classes was spent either in researching or studying for an examination or prepping for an assignment in the various programs I was enrolled in. So the rest of the day went in kind of like a study phase, a study and preparation phase.
Hmm.
In addition to that, I also found that there are so many other ways of earning your buck after you graduate from law school, because at the moment also legal work comes sparingly my way considering the field that I'm in. But taking up editing work or taking up content writing, I think in my free time, are good ways to, like a step towards financial stability as well. So this is how I've kind of been spacing my day out. And I think most importantly for someone like me who's either, at times providing informal psychosocial support to certain people. I do make it a point that I take out time for recreation and rest every day so that I'm able to rejuvenate and recharge as well. So if someone approaches me to, in an emotional crisis situation, or someone approaches me because they want to schedule sessions with me, I try to keep those also in the evening hours on weekdays in a structured format. Maybe once a week, I'm speaking to them. They want to speak to me about something, they speak to me. So that's how the day usually pans out. At least Monday to Friday, this is what the day looks like.
Okay. So this is question quite I mean not related to any legal topic, but I think it is important.
Huh.
So what is yoga? Can you clarify the meaning of yoga, as there are many misconceptions to it regarding its meaning, and how does it help any person in their professional life?
Okay, this is a layered question. Okay, so I mean, the meaning of yoga, of course, for anybody, if they do a Google search, they will be, they will get a pretty good idea about what yoga is and the different schools of yoga as well. But for me, actually, with this question, I'm remembering a line that I had read somewhere on Instagram, I think, which said, which went something like, yoga doesn't make my life better, but it makes me better at life. And I think that is the essence or the takeaway of this practice for me as an individual, as a practitioner as well. I'm sorry, can you repeat the second part of the question? Oh, the
Yeah.
misconceptions to the meaning of yoga. Now, my understanding of yoga, there are, of course, very unique and amusing myths associated with yoga that keep coming my way by virtue of me being an instructor. And I don't think that I could, address all of them. But I am going to try and break down the essence of what yoga means to me. So, usually, a yoga class or a practice will have three elements. One will be your asana practice, which will be the physical movement. The second part will be pranayam, which will be the breath work.
Hmm.
And the third will be relaxation. So I make it a point that all three of these elements are packaged into that hour when I am conducting a class. And as to certain very common misconceptions, see, yoga is for everybody, and I truly believe that. And a good instructor will actually be able to guide any student, no matter what their health conditions or illness might be, as to what the contraindications will be to the practice, and also provide them with a lot of modifications and options so that they're still able to enjoy the yoga practice. So it really doesn't matter what body type you are, where you're from, how old you are. God forbid you have a health issue, yoga can be modified and sculpted to make it a part of your life. Yeah, lastly, of course, professionally, the health benefits of yoga, whether you are seeking it at a very physical level in terms of movement, or you are seeking, you're a spiritual seeker of the practice, it has benefits for physical and mental health. I think it has been proven that, health indicators and health parameters are seen to stabilize with continued and regular authentic practice of yoga, the correct practice. There's also a certain amount of stillness and calmness that gets instilled in a person, which I think, in the kind of fast paced and hard pressed lives that most of us are living today, it is quite a skill to have. If it is something that inherently becomes a part of you just by virtue of engaging in yoga practice, I am sure that it can benefit you in a workspace where there is so much chaos, confusion, there are so many deadlines. So it definitely does that sense of peace and lightness and clarity definitely translates to all aspects of your life. It doesn't just remain limited to the mat. And I think as a professional, if somebody is participating in a class or they engage in self-practice, those 60 to 90 minutes of a day that you take out for yourself are much needed. Given the kind of lifestyles that we lead, it is something that you take out for yourself and definitely goes a long way in rejuvenating you, for the day that lies ahead of you, the next day as well. So it has benefits across the board, whether professionally or personally.
Okay. So mental health cases were in a rise during this pandemic, and this topic was talked about a lot. So please first explain to us what is mental health advocacy and how did you explore it?
In the pandemic, the sheer numbers in the rise of, people reporting a struggle with their mental health or people being diagnosed with mental illness, of course, a large part of it, played into the fact that all of us were quite isolated. There was this very drastic change in lifestyle, and it has taken a lot of time getting used to. In fact, I would say now that when things are slowly getting back to normal, even that is a huge, it's a huge adjustment. And people are now having difficulty adjusting to this new normal as well. So it has been quite the year when you look at the spectrum of how people's mental health has been affected. Mental health advocacy as a concept, I would actually at this juncture like to draw attention to advocacy for mental health as is envisioned by the World Health Organization, which says very beautifully that mental health advocacy is basically certain steps and certain actions that promote people with mental illnesses or mental health disorders to exercise their inherent human rights. And of course, as a further consequence, also reduce the stigma and the discrimination, that is associated with seeking treatment or acknowledging that someone is struggling with their mental health. For me personally, I think mental health advocacy is as simple as just speaking to someone about any cause that you believe in. I know the context is mental health advocacy, but advocacy in general, any cause that you believe in that may have impacted your life, certain positive changes or certain positive steps that you are taking, maybe as steps to improve the lives of people around you, to improve society in general. And for me, actually, it wasn't a very conscious step that I took. It kind of just fell into my lap, advocacy as a concept, because when I decided to go public with what I had gone through and with my journey, it was so overwhelming to realize that there were so many people who felt the same way as I did. So there was a feeling of mutual hope. I realized I was not alone. Other people realized they were not alone. So advocacy kind of started off like that for me. And in my day to day conversations or my day to day work as well, there are three aspects of mental health advocacy that I very consciously engage in. The first is raising awareness. The second is spreading information to the best of my abilities, accurate information. And the third is the idea of mutual help, where you can lend an ear to somebody, somebody can help you out. So these are three actions of mental health advocacy that I have observed myself undertaking on an almost day to day basis. And I think if mental health advocacy is taken up as ideally as it is envisioned, there are so many barriers, you know, global challenges that mental health face that can be addressed, whether you are talking about the access to care, whether you are talking about people with mental illnesses not having the opportunity to work or to live as equal citizens in society, whether you are talking about the treatment in mental health establishments, sometimes even the lack of alternative options, the lack of alternatives for people to access care. These are just a few, but there are so many barriers that could be addressed with the help of advocacy.
Okay, now let's talk about the laws associated with it in India and internationally too. So, why is there a need for it? And can you talk about the laws applicable in India?
Okay, so in India, we've had a particular legislation pertaining to mental health from the late 1800s, from the 1800s. And of course, the laws have evolved. The most recent legislation is the Mental Health Care Act of 2017, which is certainly a huge step forward in the right direction for persons living with mental illness. The need for having a mental health law in the first place, Prasanna, not just in not just in our country but all over the world, the laws revolving around, like, mental health stuff, they started coming about in the 1800s, way into late 1900s. There was an evolution all over, but the misconception associated with persons living with mental illnesses was also much higher. So basically, they were viewed, and incorrectly so, as dangers to society, something that people had to be saved from or protected from. So a lot of legislations that were earlier drafted or that were earlier in place all over the world looked at persons with mental illnesses from a very from an oppressor lens, if I may. Like, they are the ones who are going to be committing crimes, they are the ones who are a risk for people around them. So the laws that were drafted were actually drafted with keeping such considerations in mind. And what happened after a point of time is that, you know the conditions in which people were placed in mental health establishments, the kind of degrading treatments that they had to go through, so many human rights violations, whether you talk about non-consensual electroconvulsive therapies, whether you talked about forced sterilizations of people living with mental disorders, whether you talk about forced institutionalization, involuntary admissions, abuse within establishments, within households, all of this was on the rise. It was rampant. It existed in some, it still does today. But I think
All
the
this,
laws had to,
all this you're talking about in India, these cases were in India only or all over the world?
all in India and all over the world, which is why I think there was this global need that was felt that our laws have to be amended, our laws have to be up to date. In fact, with recent research, we realized how sophisticated psychosocial interventions are today, how sophisticated psychiatric treatment is today. And also, it was found that, in fact, the real picture is that persons who are suffering from a mental illness or those who live with a mental health disorder are actually much more susceptible to becoming the victims of abuse or oppression. So, I think a time was needed to frame the laws in a manner that their rights are upheld, that they are not treated as unequal citizens of society, but with people who have very valid and have deserve the right to live full lives. And I think that is where the idea to have more holistic laws representing their human rights and taking care of their interests in the mental health care treatment and process came into the picture.
Hmm, hmm, yeah. So there's this Mental Health Care Act, which was passed in 2017. Is this a good law, or do you think there are many things yet to be addressed? And if yes, then what are those?
I certainly feel that the current version of the act that we have, it's a good piece of legislation. We have taken such leaps forward in trying to secure, the rights of persons living with mental illness. But you are a lawyer too. You know that no law is perfect. There are very few laws which are ideal or perfect. There's always a little
Yeah.
something. And, yes, in my opinion, I do think that there are a few concepts which have still not been addressed very well under the current legislation. One of them is adolescent mental health care and the rights associated with adolescents. So that is something that the Act is quite silent on. Another is legitimizing alternative forms of treatment, giving people a wider range of options to choose from and not just the conventional medication and therapy model, but maybe legitimizing more options. Um, as someone reading the legislation, I still feel that there is an inclination towards the institutionalization model. So the language of the act is such that you feel that there is this leaning towards hospitalization or institutionalization, whereas the world over we're all working towards de-institutionalizing the mental health care system. And probably another thing that I would hope to see a change in would be that maybe more stringent measures woven into the language of the act, where there are higher obligations placed on healthcare providers or insurance companies to cover mental illness as well. So there is a small mention, but I would hope that larger steps and more, I mean, probably stricter language to that effect could be included in the act in the future. So that is another change that I hope we can see in the coming years as well.
Do you see any change with regards to the awareness about the laws, the legislation? Like mental health, people are talking about a lot.
Yes.
But what about the laws? Are people talking about that?
No, I do not think that mental health law has received the kind of traction that it should be getting. And I think I've said this earlier as well. This is one particular legislation that can be useful and impact a very, very large number of people. So it's not necessary that you have to be a service user or someone who is suffering from or struggling with a mental illness to think that, oh, this law is applicable to me. Someone could be a caregiver as well. You could be a family member to someone who requires mental health support. And it is so important for everybody to know their rights and duties under the scope of this legislation. It's a widely impacting act. But the conversation on it, unfortunately, is very limited. And that is something that a lot of us are trying to change. So I hope that there is a positive light to this in the future.
So listeners, please share this episode so that people know about mental health laws.
Yeah, we can link the legislation also, the BEAR Act also for them.
Yeah, sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so which countries do you think are doing really good in this area? Any examples of good practices they have adopted for mental health legislations or advocacy?
There are so many countries who have very beautiful legislations when it comes to mental health, and it's a real pleasure reading it as well. Two examples come to my mind at the moment. One is the Philippines Mental Health Act of 2019, which I personally found to be one of the most progressive and inclusive pieces of legislation on mental health that I have read till now. You know, they have a clause in their act which states that any person or any citizen with a mental illness has the right to exercise all of their inherent rights, irrespective of their age, which means that they are taking, age into the equation. This is something that is absent in our legislation. So basically, an adolescent in the Philippines, as per the reading of the legislation, can exercise his or her rights under the Mental Health Care Act, which I think is a huge thing. Canada also has a progressive mental health legislation. They do, and even their medical laws are quite progressive. So you have children as young as 12 years old vested with responsibility to take their own decisions. The supported decision-making models are quite strong over there. And in the UK also, you have the Mental Health Care Act, you have acts for various areas, but you also have a legislation that helps professionals to determine capacity, which becomes so important because in mental health, a big question or something that is challenged so frequently is that if a person has a mental illness, they're not capable of taking decisions for their life, which is so wrong. And I think it is so important that, UK has legislations which actually take that extra step and even look into capacity in the scope of an entirely new legislation, not just something that you've defined under the Mental Health Care Act and left it at that, but something that is delved into so deeply. So I think that's really, really important. So yeah, these are some of the acts that come to mind when I think about, oh, this is something that we can pick up from here. This is something we can pick up from here. But it's wonderful to see that these nations have great legislation.
Probably as it was expected, but yeah, these are mostly developed nations, so we will get to that point someday. Hope.
Certainly.
And I hope that my sterilizations and are stopped. That is the main thing I'm concerned of. Such practices.
Certainly. Anything I think which is undertaken without the informed consent of a person living with mental illness must be curbed and must be penalized. I don't think it is okay at all. And I'm sure that we can have language to that effect very, very soon in our legislations as well.
Yeah, let's hope. Okay, what are the common barriers you have faced for mental health advocacy till now, and what do you think are the solutions to it?
Okay, so for mental health advocacy, I think one of the most, it's a very basic barrier, I would say, is the fact that there's a lack of information and general awareness in amongst people. Now, this becomes problematic, for example, if I am trying to help somebody seek treatment or they want to go and visit a professional, but because of the resistance that they face, not just from, the stigma and taboo of society lens, but also the kind of hardships that they face at home because there is not enough understanding or conversation about what mental illness is, how it can be cured. They are sometimes unable to seek care, or it takes a very long time for them to get the kind of treatment or the healing that they're looking for. So this is one of the most basic barriers that you encounter as an advocate. Unfortunately, there is also self-inflicted stigma, situations where a person is speaking to themselves or speaking about themselves in a very unfortunate way, not understanding that these are things that can be taken care of. And I think the advocacy has to move in that direction where you're able to tell people that they don't need to be afraid. And I think that can only happen, with the spread of accurate information and messages of hope and affirmations. Another barrier to mental health advocacy, I run an Instagram page to this effect. And something that I've picked up from there is that, advocating for mental health is not a very attractive or appealing topic. I think it is something that as a creator for content, you have to brainstorm a lot to make it palatable and interesting for the people who are going to be digesting and consuming that information. There have been times, and it's happened in front of me, that somebody scrolling through Instagram will just scroll through something related to the mind, something related to mental illness, that they don't want to engage with it at all. I know it's a personal call, but I do feel that how to help people realize or how to let people know that mental health is very important. And there's another very beautiful saying that not everybody has mental illness, but certainly everybody has mental health. It does impact all of us. Trying to make this concept something that people take to is also a challenge from time to time, especially when you're, engaging in self advocacy like I do. A lack of mental health programs, adequate mental health programs around us, whether you're talking about the quality of the program or the number of programs, that is also a hassle. Many a times, budgetary allocations, dedicated to mental health as a cause, and even the seriousness, in fact, that is attached to mental health as a concept is very problematic because the levels are very low, whether you're looking at the budget, whether you're looking at the seriousness of it all. So that's an issue. And I think stemming from the first point that I said, that there are so many stakeholders in the mental health care process, a lack of awareness amongst various stakeholders in this process can also become problematic when you're trying to get something done or you're trying to achieve something. So I think all stakeholders involved in the process need to be well informed, need to be up to date, and a certain level of empathy and a certain level of compassion is required on the job. So that these are some of the common barriers I think I have experienced when you're dealing with barriers to mental health advocacy. And I think one of the most important is the use of the words, terminology that we apply to people who are struggling with their mental health, or the kind of sentences or the words that we use when we are trying to speak of a situation also makes a lot of difference. I think the terms that are used most often around us actually do more harm than good. And I think it has to be a very conscious practice and an effort that terminologies are given emphasis. How are we speaking to people? What are the words that we're using? So that is something that, because it lends a very positive light to the whole advocacy procedure. So that is another barrier. In terms of solution, something that I have always felt is important is integrating mental health with various levels of our education system. So it can be something as simple and easy as talking to school children about what mental health means, or introducing a wellness based subject for them in school, or it can be something as something bigger, making mental health law a mandatory subject in law colleges, for example. I think there has to be this constant integration at all levels so that people don't get disconnected from the idea or from the concept of mental health. It's not something we can just put in front of somebody one day at the age of 25 or 26 and just expect them to take to it. I think it's something that needs to be holistically woven with the education process. So that is one solution that I see. Building on mental health resources, whether we are looking at research on why, taking a mental health day is okay if you're in the workplace, or the idea that, the mental well being of your employees matters and it needs to be taken seriously. So, dedicated funds towards research, really promoting mental health research, that is another solution. And I think increasing the traction in general towards all areas of mental health, whether we are looking at care, whether we are looking at law, involving the stakeholders, integrating the process, and adding authenticity to it. I think that's another, way that barriers to advocacy could maybe, be reduced. Um, Something that I thought of recently, I was just sitting up one night and I thought, why not incentivize a career in mental health? I mean, there are so many career options that are pushed, you know, why not incentivize something? There is so much that a person can be contributing towards when you look at the mental health space as well. And, why not incentivize that? Why not help people think about, oh, yes, this is important. I can be paid well. Uh, this is why it is important, and maybe I should take it up. And last but not the least, something that I feel is the need of the hour is when we are dealing with professionals, whether you are looking at the legal aspect or you're looking at the medical aspect, it is important for lawyers, doctors, mental health staff, medical staff to be trained in the provisions of the mental health law as well. I think there's a dual benefit to having, a training of this sort, because it's something very simply as even, like a doctor providing a treatment option could also provide some very unique or beautiful insight on the rights or the duties of the client who's coming to him. And I think they'll also be very well aware of their own rights and duties under the scope of the act. So there's a dual benefit to having professionals be trained under this piece of legislation.
Yeah. And in terms of like you were saying about why not incentivize this profession, like, and so I guess many students, many of our listeners would be interested in taking this as a career option, especially after listening to you. So how would you guide them? Like, can you explain kind of, for them as a step-by-step thing? Like you must do this, you must do that, you must take such course from here, etc., etc.
Okay. So let me be very honest. At this point of time, I myself am in the process of paving my career in the mental health field. But I would love to share what I have done up to this point, if it is of help to somebody. So my initial attraction towards this niche of law came from the fact that I am somebody with lived experience of mental illness. So this is something that I immediately took to. I found it very interesting. And I said that, this is something that I would like to invest my time in. So once I found this, I did a little bit of reading and then I started a research on because as a lawyer, I had not heard about it till I graduated from law school. In 2018, I didn't know that there is a mental health law despite being a service user through law school. I was not aware. So I did a little bit of research and I did come across organizations which are offering diplomas on, mental health, human rights, and law because they all go beautifully hand in hand. So something that I did is that I went and got myself enrolled in, courses from legitimate organizations that were providing me with a skill and an understanding of what a career or what mental health law is all about, and not just from a national lens, but also from a very global perspective. And in addition to that, something that I did is I looked for more short term courses, maybe 1 month, 2 months, which were related to mental health, because I just felt that why mental health law in isolation? It is something that can be clubbed very beautifully. For example, there is a distance learning program from Yale University, which is called the Science of Well-being. And I think it goes very well and it goes hand in hand with mental health care. It is something that will be useful to you and to people around you. So, you equip yourself with these tiny other qualifications that help you build a stronger base. And of course, now I'm at a stage where I have completed a very long program from the Center for Mental Health Law and Policy under the aegis of the World Health Organization. This is the International Diploma in Mental Health, Human Rights and Law. So this was a year-long program that I undertook and I have completed. I just got my results a while back. So now I'll be looking at the next step. So probably a master's program. So I will have to look for colleges that will be offering me subjects which are conducive to what I want to learn. Or you can always, there are a lot of organizations in India also which are doing good work in mental health, whether you are interested in field work or you are interested in the research end of it. So I think that is something that people will have to check for themselves what is their leaning towards and go ahead accordingly. I am also keeping my eyes and ears open for, legal practices that are dedicated to mental health law cases. So that is something that I look forward to hearing good about in the next couple of months or years. So this is how it's been for me right now, but I'm still in the process of paving my way. But every day with some new research, with some new insight, it's a step forward.
Are you also planning to, start your practice?
I would like to, but I certainly feel that doing my master's would be the first step. And after that, whatever I have to do after that. So I am actually actively searching for good schools which will offer me a master's in mental health or maybe medical law, something that is related to what I have done. So that is the next step for me. That is where the research is headed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so over to our last question. Please share an incident from your career which is very memorable to you.
So, like I just said, I'm in the process of paving my career, and I hope in the next 2-3 years I'll have something very, very nice to share with you. But jokes apart, I think I feel a lot of the learning and a lot of tips that I have received when I have done programs on mental health care, like, when I'm now in a position, if I can help someone in an emotional crisis, at least be that immediate, pillar of support before I can direct them to a professional. I think these are moments of, real connection and, being human. And it gives me a lot of purpose and a lot of drive. I think when I'm able to help somebody, especially when it comes, even if it's a one-off incident, it makes me feel very good that, I'm investing myself in something that matters. So these are the moments when I really connect with people. There's so much of vulnerability, so much of honesty, and so much that I get to learn as well. So all of these incidents become all those memorable, moments for me till date. So that they're all very special to me. They're a huge source of learning and very, very special.
Okay, that was a great conversation. And thanks, Asauri, for doing this with us.
Thank you so much.
Spending your time with us, explaining mental health advocacy and also mental health laws. And thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you like this episode, then you must also check out our other episodes available here and follow us here so that you don't miss out a new episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prasanna. Thank you for having me.